Gentlemen, my name is Nick Burns. I'm a professor at Harvard University, former American diplomat. I have the honor to moderate this panel. The first thing I want to say is to congratulate my good friend Wolfgang, congratulate the Nunn-Lugar for his Nunn-Lugar Award, very well deserved. And we're going to continue in this spirit to try to investigate a world in nuclear crisis, a world where North Korea has nuclear weapons, is threatening Japan and the Republic of Korea, and threatening to develop a nuclear weapon that could attack the United States and Canada. A world in which the Iran nuclear agreement is holding, but some countries, including President Trump in the United States, are evincing doubts about that agreement. A world in which the Russian Federation, and we'll hear from Ambassador Kislyak, is threatening to violate the INF Treaty of 1987 and introducing new technologies that would destabilize the nuclear balance in Europe. A world of a nuclear posture review of the United States, which puts forth some new thoughts about nuclear stability. Nothing could be more important for global security than these issues. We'll talk about them with the panel for the next hour and a half, and then after that, at 4:45, when the panel recedes, we're going to ask Beatrice Fihn, the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, to come up. She has a statement to make, and she'll be happy to take your questions as well. We have a first-rate panel, and let me introduce them all to you. And I think it's only fair, Madam President, in protocol order. President Kersti, who's the President of the Republic of Estonia from Tallinn. Madame Ying, who is Chairwoman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the National People's Congress, the Parliament of the People's Republic of China. Sergey Kislyak, who's First Deputy Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Council of Federation, Moscow, Russia. Madame Choo, Chairwoman of the ruling party in the Republic of Korea, the Minjoo Party, member of the Committee on Foreign Relations and Unification of the National Assembly in Seoul. And last but definitely not least, my friend, the Deputy Secretary of State, John Sullivan, from the State Department in Washington, D.C., representing the United States of America. We have a lot of issues to discuss. I'm going to ask each panelist to make remarks that won't exceed more than 5 minutes. Some of them will obviously want to talk more about North Korea, others perhaps the situation in Europe, but they're free to say what they wish. I may have a few follow-up questions for each of them, but rest assured we'll turn it over to you for your questions and a good discussion. Madam President, welcome. Please start it off.
Thank you. I'm coming indeed from a small non-nuclear country without the trigger, but talking as a NATO ally on its eastern border, obviously. We need more frank discussions, not only on arms control, but nuclear weapons and strategies themselves, because nuclear is unfortunately back clearly in the mainstream. And as long as there are weapons in the world, then NATO will remain a nuclear alliance with nuclear deterrence. We have a country in Europe with a doctrine of escalate to de-escalate, as we already heard today here in this room, and therefore a counter-reaction, at least by recognition in the nuclear posture review from the other side of the Atlantic, is not at all surprising. But I guess my four co-panelists here are much more likely to talk about the immediate risks and on how to contain it. My role here is probably different, as I represent the world's only digital state, as you, Nick, know very well. I want to talk about the relevance of nuclear deterrence in the future in the light of the technological developments, in particular the artificial intelligence. And so that you don't get me wrong here, I'm clearly on an academic side here rather than political. But someone needs to bring discussion into the discussion. Do you even need a trigger to push the trigger in the future? How does technological development change the nuclear world? I do not want to talk about dead hands. These are automatic, not autonomous systems. I want to talk about autonomous AI threats. What if the next worm inside someone's nuclear enrichment system or weapons system would be artificial intelligence? What would then happen? Could this worm, if it is really a singular AI system, therefore autonomous, after having examined the intention of the equipment and verifying its potential for military use, turn the system against its founders, at the moment unknown also for those who sent the worm? Or could it even turn it against the ones who created itself, the AI worm? Maybe it would take a totally different perspective than we predict inside the system. We cannot predict what else it would have learned while in the system. We could predict, based on the data that normally is in any kind of nuclear system, what the artificial intelligence would see and learn. But if there is accidental data in the system, let's just imagine some person who has access to the system had used their computer also for some quite normal activities, say reading news. It's terrible cyber hygiene, I know, but the most common way how systems get corrupted, actually. The AI snooping around in the system would have suddenly found on that computer now in the system that according to the news, false or true, in some other country in the world, some non-behaving regime exists, or non-behaving according to its standards. Say, to make it more interesting, it may read a piece of news that in United Nations General Assembly there is to be a vote banning the AI for military purposes. It might draw conclusions, this piece of news is data somehow related to the system it is currently in. Or it may simply conclude that it needs to intervene to avoid the ban on AI on military purposes because it knows it is one. Of course, you think it's science fiction, but I doubt it is science fiction, frankly. People like Elon Musk and Jan Tallinn and others, they warn us that there's already a 10% chance that in 5 years' time we'll have AI, and 50% chance that we will have it by 2050. Meanwhile, we are grappling with trying to have an international agreement on below AI level cyber threats. I think we should really step up our thinking in this vein as well, in addition to dealing with the conventional nuclear, or what I like to call nuclear threats 1.0. We face nuclear threats 2.0, and we are not at all ready.
Thank you very much. Madam President, if I could just ask you a follow-up question before I ask Madam Ying to take the floor. You've identified a critical issue for the future. There's competition in the field of quantum physics, for instance, between China and the United States. As we look at artificial intelligence in a digital world, we have to worry about whether deterrence can be effective. Has this been discussed at the NATO alliance, and you and your fellow heads of government? Do you have a summit this summer? Should this be on the agenda?
I think we need to have a technical working group first, which would seriously look at the issue and seriously try to understand how first we could start to understand somebody is close to having an AI. Probably it's following energy consumption somewhere globally we would be able to detect. And then we need to agree that if we detect, we will somehow inspect and react. So indeed, we need to have cooperation, but I think NATO is maybe not the first place to start. Maybe United Nations would be a much better place, because this problem is not going to be unipolar, bipolar, or concerning 5 states. This problem will be much more common, because development of AI is diffuse. It's not concentrated as we are used to with nuclear risks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you. Madame Fihn.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to support the statement by Her Excellency. I share her expressed concern and about the danger, about the risks of nuclear development. That I also want to say that the reward ceremony has been very moving, and I want to congratulate Kislyak. I think Ambassador Sergey deserves it, and I also appreciate this gesture. I think it's very important. It reminds me of some readings about the last days of the Second World War, when President Truman was informed about the existence of such a weapon, which will make a country instantly the greatest in the world, but also has the danger of leading the world to the end of civilization, and the mixed feeling the new president, and his team felt. So far, after so many decades, we have so far managed preventing a major nuclear war, but obviously the challenges, the dangers are growing. So I think the subject for this discussion is very relevant. In connection, I want to make 3 points. First, I think it's important that the PERM 5 should continue their efforts and continue to take responsibilities to maintain nuclear to maintain global strategic stability, and also to safeguard the non-proliferation regime, and to continue the nuclear disarmament. China maintains a very small nuclear arsenal, and China follows the policy of self-defense and minimum deterrence. And China also is committed to the principle of non-first use of nuclear weapons and no use of nuclear weapons against any nuclear states at any circumstances, and no use of nuclear weapons against nuclear-free zones. We are also in support of CTBT. The second point I want to make is something that struck me following following the Munich Security Conference all these years. I think maybe at some stage we need to think how to improve or upgrade global security governance to reflect this highly integrated global economy. Take, for example, many of you present belong to the US-led military alliance, but some of them are not. We are outside the alignment. So do we have the same security concern? And can we trust each other? Or are we going to turn each other into strategic rivals, as some of the US latest documents mentioned? And where are we leading the world to? So I think these are the questions we need to start asking ourselves and think about them. China supports the idea of, China advocates the idea of common security, security for all. And our president has proposed the building of a community of shared future. And that is the direction we believe the world should go into. The third point is that the Korean nuclear issue is undoubtedly the most urgent matter for the day. And I think it's also a matter between having common security or one-side security at the cost of the other side. Korean War ended 60 years ago, and we all know that there is only truce agreement, no peace agreement for the peninsula. And the United States and its allies have been standing in confrontation with the DPRK for all these decades. And I think that is the root cause of the tension of the peninsula. And now the DPRK regards the paramount military pressure as the threat of its very survival. So it is determined to take the nuclear path to achieve the kind of ultimate security, which is at the cost of the regional security, at the cost of many of its the security of many of its neighbors. But the problem we have is that there is no trust. There is such a serious lack of trust between the DPRK and the United States, and it's not possible for any agreement, bilateral or multilateral agreement, to be implemented. And the peninsula is dragged into a vicious circle of increased tension. As far as China is concerned, we stand for the denuclearization of Korea, Korean peninsula, and complete nuclear-free peninsula. And China has strictly abided by UN resolutions and implemented all the sanctions. But in the meantime, China also hopes that the peace talk can be initiated, can be reopened, and there should be a negotiated settlement to resolve the security concerns of all the parties. And China proposed for double suspension, double freeze, to give peace a chance. And recently we've seen a very good opportunity. That is the ROK and DPRK have reached out to each other using the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic as a platform. And when the athletes from the two countries came into the opening ceremony hand in hand, I think it's a very strong gesture for the world about their yearning for peace, and they need to be respected. And it's a sincere hope of the region that U.S. would avail itself of this opportunity and to restart negotiations with DPRK in order to bring peace back to the peninsula. Otherwise, the concern is that the situation may go back to tension again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could just ask you a follow-up question. I think everyone wants to hear more from you, Madame Ying, about North Korea. We had a chance to talk yesterday, and it seems that President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump have a combined strategy, and they have had for a year. Neither of them wants North Korea to have nuclear weapons. Both of them believe, I think, that North Korea has been irresponsible to conduct nuclear tests and to threaten the Republic of Korea and Japan and American forces in the Pacific. Both of them have put heavy sanctions on North Korea. And in the last 10 days, we've heard from the American administration a willingness to enter into talks, I should say, not negotiations, but talks, which would be a breakthrough, maybe building off some of the good progress that's been made around the Pyeongchang Olympics. Do you see China and the United States acting together here in a way that could be part of the resolution of this conflict eventually?
I could see that China-US agree on many aspects relating to the peninsula's nuclear problem. We all agree that there should be no nuclear weapons on the peninsula. We all agree that there should be peaceful settlement. We all agree there should be pressure. Sanction is necessary. But China thinks that sanction alone will not get the job done. There has to be peace talks. And the UN has had 10 resolutions on sanctions, and North Korea had 6 nuclear tests. But every UN resolution called for talks, for peace talks. But that decision of UN has been hanging. So it will be very good if U.S. can use this opportunity. I understand the difficulties of reopening talks, and I understand there is a serious concern about whether the other side is trustworthy. But with the regional support, with the world support, and with the sincerity of seeking peaceful settlement, I think there is a hope of talks. I hope U.S. will make up its mind and start talks.
But you would agree that the problem here is not the U.S. administration, it's North Korea.
Both sides needs to make an effort. I think one side's effort will not be enough. And both sides need to try to trust the other side a bit more.
And I'm sure we'll come back to this in the question and answer. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kislyak.
Thank you. Well, the subject matter we are discussing today, nuclear security without arms control, is certainly one of the most topical for obvious reasons. The dialogue in this field is very bleak, to put it mildly. I do not remember when we had substantive discussions with the United States on the whole spectrum of these issues, and at the same time, the mistrust between sides is on the rise. There are new developments that make things even more alarming, and I would refer, certainly looking from the Russian position, to new American documents that are defining their policy in the realm of nuclear arms. The NPR recent paper that outlines the view of the United States government as to how they are going to build nuclear weapons and how they are planning possibly to deploy them and to use them is causing a lot of question, if I can speak about this very politely. One of the issues that certainly jumps into your eyes when you read the paper and you read the explanations that were given in the Pentagon, and mind you, we do it very carefully, is that from now on, the American administration seemed to be taking very relaxed position as to the conditions of the use and the first use of nuclear weapons. The overall formula that suggests that nuclear weapons of the United States can be used in a critical situation can involve wartime situation, non-military situation. I do not know, the imagination can be expanded without limits on this issue. And we were trying to listen to the explanations that were given to that. And to be honest, we haven't gotten a clear picture. On top of that, the new notion of the United States planning to introduce nuclear weapons with a reduced power as a kind of new type of deterrence, merging with the new vision as to how nuclear weapons can be deployed, gives a sense that what our American colleagues are talking about is that they are looking at the nuclear weapons more like a war-fighting instrument rather than a classical deterrence. It certainly creates additional questions. I would tell you, irrespective of the many allegations as to what Russian nuclear doctrine is, that nothing has changed. We said some 10 years plus minus ago that nuclear weapons of Russia can be used only in two situations. One, if nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction are used against Russia.
Or other.
Two, if a possible conflict can cause a critical situation of survival of a nation. There are only two situations when our doctrine allows the use of nuclear weapon. The specialists that are trying to understand the American position try to merge the two and suggest that what our American friends are offering now is try to deny right to defend itself because our nuclear posture is classically defensive. So we'll see how things will develop. We'll see how the thinking in the United States is going to develop, and we will see whether there is going to be any dialogue on these issues that will be able to allay our concerns. On the other side of our relations in nuclear field with American colleagues, and there are a lot of discussions now about alleged violations on the side of Russian Federation of INF Treaty. I would tell you once again what we are saying, because it's really the fact that all Russian programs are totally compliant with our obligations, including on INF. So we cannot accept that kind of allegations as truthful. And when we see them being employed in order to justify the change of nuclear posture, the change of the attitudes toward the use of nuclear weapons, we are asking ourselves what is the real reason behind it. At the same time, I'd like to remind those who haven't been following these discussions between us and our American colleagues about compliance with INF. We have been raising a number of issues about American compliance with the treaty. And there have been a number of issues. The very last one, and the very recent one, is the deployment of the so-called Aegis Ashore in Europe, the so-called Mk-41 launching systems that by design are made to be able to launch all type of weapons, the anti-ballistic interceptors, as well as long-range cruise missiles. If that is the case, a Mk-41 deployed on the land is a clear violation of INF because it explicitly prohibits the launching systems to be deployed on the land within the range of INF Treaty. We have been raising this issue with the United States, but to be honest, we haven't yet received not only a serious explanation, but also a serious dialogue of what is going to happen. We are still committed to the treaty. We are willing to ensure that it continues. And I hope that at some point we certainly will be able to have a more meaningful dialogue with American colleagues of ours. I would like to add to this that among the recent developments is the milestone achieved on the February the 5th, that means some 10 days ago, in implementing the START Treaty, where we we informed our American colleagues about our full compliance with the limits established in the treaty. Moreover, I would tell you that our numbers are even lower than the limits allowing it to be deployed at this particular time. Our American colleagues informed us that they also reached the levels that are in the information we got exactly as provided for in the treaty. But at the same time, there are several questions that we identify in our statement of February the 5th, and that is that our American colleagues, among the reductions that they have conducted, did several by way of conversion rather than reductions. And it was done in a way that we weren't able to certify that this system can no longer carry nuclear weapons. We are very much committed to the START Treaty. And we expressed the hope that American colleagues will work with us in constructive fashion to put aside the remaining questions in order to make sure that the treaty works well. Having dwelt a little bit on this bilateral context, I would like to say two things about the larger non-proliferation context. One is Iran nuclear deal. It's an agreement that was reached by Americans, us, Europeans, and the Iranians. It's a collective effort. It's being implemented, we believe, in good faith by Iranians. The IAEA has certified compliance by Tehran with the provisions of the treaty. And we want this treaty that, by the way, was approved upon by the Security Council of the United Nations, we want it to continue. Recently, we hear more and more signals from Washington to the extent that they are considering revisiting their participation in the treaty. If that is going to happen, that would be an enormous blow to the collective effort to make sure that non-proliferation efforts survive, that non-proliferation treaty that is basis for this agreement is working. It would be a very negative signal also to the North Korean friends of ours, because we all are calling for negotiated solution and coming to an agreement that would help to solve the nuclear issue on the Korean peninsula, and we strongly support that kind of work. But the pacta sunt servanda, what is important, that if you come to an agreement, you need to have wisdom and courage to comply with it till the end. And when it comes to North Korea proper, I would second to what my Chinese colleagues said, that these days are very interesting, and I would say informative about the possible ways of addressing the issue of North Korean nuclear weapons. China and Russia, we have been supporting the idea of a double freeze as a first step for allowing conditions to start dialogue. Our American friends didn't appreciate the idea, and it was hanging in the way. But irrespective of big political statements, big political agreements, the Olympic Games that are taking place in South Korea de facto helped to establish the double freeze, at least for this particular time. Today there is a self-restraint on ballistic and nuclear testing on North Korea's side, without maybe making big statements to this effect. And we also watch with respect self-restraint of Americans and South Koreans in the exercising in this field. That was, among other things, most probably very important moment that shows that that kind of approach with self-restraint can help to build conditions to start dialogue. What happened between South Korea and North Korea in them being able simply to talk and even to reestablish the hotline, as far as I understand, might prove to be a first step. It's very important not to lose momentum and to build upon it. We've heard Vice President of the United States suggesting that the United States would be willing to participate in talks or negotiations. I don't know what's the difference in Russian, is exactly the same word. But what is important, not to lose momentum. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Kislyak, my follow-up question to you involves the word trust. Throughout the history of arms control, from the 50s to the 60s, the 70s, and beyond, there was never absolute trust between competitors, but there was a measure of trust. When President Reagan signed the INF treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev, he said famously, he quoted a Russian proverb, trust but verify. We've seen a dramatic decrease in trust between Washington and Moscow in the last several years, but in the last 2 days. Yesterday, a US grand jury indicted 13 Russians for engaging in a conspiracy fueled by millions of dollars from Russia to undermine the elections in the United States. This all happened when you were ambassador to the United States in 2015 and 16. Were you aware of this, and are you aware of the tremendous damage it's done to how the American people think about the Putin regime?
I have seen so many allegations, indictments in recent years towards the Russians. Our American colleagues launched even a kind of hunting spree throughout the world on Russian computer wizards. It's something that has spoiled the trust between us even before you came up with the new allegation. The problem is that, first, I'm not sure that I can trust American law enforcement to be the most precise and truthful source of information about what Russians do. We have seen in the past so many things that prove to be non-true. It's almost a truism now to remember the white powder shown by Americans to just in the Security Council to justify the war against Iraq. But what is important is that cybersecurity is an issue that haunts us all. I have in my briefcase a comparative table that was prepared on the basis of analysis of computer security companies in a number of countries, including in Russia and other countries. And they show that the main source of computer attacks in the world is not Russia, it's the United States, 20–30%. And we also might have a lot of reasons to raise the questions addressed to the United States about the situation that are emanating from the territory of the United States. When it comes to my being ambassador in the United States, I would say that we never get involved as a government in the political life in the United States. I have never done anything of the sort, not that my embassy did. So whatever allegations are being mounted against us, are simply fantasies that are being used for political reasons inside the United States in the fight between different sides of the political divide that is haunting the United States now.
One final word on this. There's been a lot of conversations here the last 2 days in Munich about what happened in Russian meddling in the German elections, in the French elections, in the Dutch elections, in the Czech elections this year. And what your country is doing is undermining the ability of political leaders in the West to engage in arms control and nuclear security talks. In our country, all of the intelligence heads of each of our agencies in public open testimony last week said they were convinced that the Putin government is already intervening in the 2018 elections in the United States. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, has come to the same conclusion. I'm just saying, if we're talking about nuclear security, your government has completely undermined the foundation for it. And you were ambassador when this was happening, so you must have known something about it.
I've said already that we didn't meddle in the American political life, and to suggest that we started meddling in new elections that haven't started, even more bizarre to hear. And we know and we see what is happening in the United States. How easy it is for the United States to dispense with the quality of Russian-American relations for the sake of making scores between different parties, between different groupings. The United States is now a country where everybody is almost fighting everybody. The Democrats are fighting the Republican White House, the liberal press against the president, and it's your life, it's your fight. And don't bring us into your infights, because we have nothing to do with that. We wanted to have normal relations with you, but we are not going to walk around Washington with extended hands seeking for cooperation. Whenever you finish with this fight, and normalcy will return to internal political life in the United States, we'll keep the doors open.
To be continued. Madam Choo, thank you for being here. Please, the floor is yours.
The North Korean nuclear issue is regarded as the most significant threat to nuclear security. 72 years have passed since Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. More than half of the Korean population resides in the areas close to this latitude line. To us Koreans, the risk of a new Cold War on the Korean Peninsula is a threat to our own survival. The outbreak of another war will lead to total annihilation. The Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, now taking place in Korea, serves to promote peace and the world's only divided nation. It provided a historic momentum by opening the window of opportunity for dialogue between South and North Korea, which had all communication channels closed for nearly 2 years. Last week, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un invited President Minjoo to Pyongyang. Now we are giving serious thought to how we should go about the post-Olympic engagement with the North. We hope that the inter-Korean dialogue can lead to the next phase of relations, including cooperation on the economic front. Before we make the move in that direction, North Korea must stop further provocations and show as a commitment to denuclearization. After the Second World War, Europe created the opportunity to promote the unity of the continent by establishing the European Coal and Steel Community. It also demonstrated the great wisdom of overcoming the Cold War through the Helsinki process. The current Korean government hopes to create a new peace and economic model called new economic map for the Korean Peninsula and the last remaining vestige of the Cold War, connecting the two Koreas in a single economic belt, and undertaking trust-building efforts can be a peaceful solution that we need to pursue in the field of economy. However, Seoul is also applying a principled and internationally coordinated approach to the faithful enforcement of UN sanctions against North Korea, acting in violation of the resolutions. But at the same time, our position is that sanctions are not an end in itself, but they are important tools of opportunity and that bring the North to the negotiating table. The North Korean issue is a long-term task requiring patience. As the European history shows, the peaceful means of dialogue and contacts are the only solution to the problem. As South Korean President Moon-jae-in unveiled Korean Peninsula Peace Initiative, he emphasizes 3 no's: no nuclear North Korea, no war on the Korean Peninsula, and no rift between Korea and its allies. In order to counter North Korea's advancing nuclear and missile capabilities, the South Korean government has developed its own defense system. It is also seeking a series of effective and tailored measures based on the ROK-US combined deterrence strategy. However, such military options are only a last resort. The peaceful and stable means can only lead to a de-escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula. I would like to ask the international community for continued support for President Moon's new Berlin Doctrine, leading us to a path of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Our future lies in the balance of coexistence, not in the balance of terror. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. May I ask you a follow-up question? And it just has to do with the pattern of behavior of the North Korean regime. The agreed framework of 1994, the North Koreans adhered to it and then violated it. The 2007-8 negotiations, they adhered to it and then violated it. Do you worry that the current initiative of Kim Jong-un, which is to have more open relations with the Republic of Korea, is just an attempt by him to divide the Republic of Korea from the United States and from Japan? And do you think it's inevitable at some point he'll go back to nuclear testing? Should we believe his promises and the statement that he made on Monday morning?
지금 하셔도 됩니다. 하셔도 됩니다. 네, 발언하셔도 됩니다. I've mentioned the post-Pyeongchang engagement with the North. North Korea violated 1994 agreement, and it also violated one agreement in the year 2004. And since Moon Jae-in administration took office, North Korea has conducted 6 nuclear tests. And fired 11 missiles. But despite this hostile attitudes, North Korea agreed to send a single ice hockey team. And unexpectedly, North Korea sent a high-level delegation led by Kim Yo-jong, who is Kim Jong-un's younger brother. And this high-level delegation invited President Moon Jae-in to Pyongyang. Like you said, North Korea's intention is difficult to tell. Is it an attempt to drive a wedge between South Korea and its allies? Or is the North Korean regime still trying to undertake provocations? We cannot be sure of its intention. But like I said before in my opening remarks, and as we heard from other panelists, I think we need to take advantage of this momentum and lead North Korea to the negotiating table. And I would like to ask for the support of the international community.
Very much. Deputy Secretary Sullivan, you've been very patient. You've heard views about North Korea, about the Iran nuclear deal. There's been a little bit of discussion of the INF treaty, the nuclear posture review. The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, there's been discussion of all those issues and more. Let me start by correcting some misperceptions and misunderstandings about our nuclear posture review, what it does and what it doesn't do. At base, it reaffirms longstanding U.S. policy and doctrine, our commitment to nonproliferation and the Nonproliferation Treaty, our commitment to arms control, New START, INF, and more, to the extent we have willing interlocutors. The negative security assurance, we won't use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states that are in compliance with the Nonproliferation Treaty, moratorium on nuclear testing. It is of a piece with U.S. policy and doctrine over decades. What's changed? What is new in this nuclear posture review? Well, first of all, our assessment of the security situation has changed. The development of, while the U.S. government over the last 10 years has been focused on reducing the number of nuclear weapons, reducing their salience in our nuclear posture, other countries, Russia, have not been engaged in such a reduction. There is a vast difference in the number of, for example, non-strategic nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. We have reduced our non-strategic nuclear weapons by 90% over the last several decades. The nuclear posture review is really addressing a new security situation. The response to that is to update our nuclear triad. We're not introducing new weapons. The weapons that have been referred to both today on the panel and elsewhere, two in particular, the low-yield submarine-launched ballistic missile has been in the U.S. program for decades. It's not a new system, nor is the so-called SLCM, sea-launched cruise missile. Those are in our nuclear program to respond to weapons and nuclear doctrine by other countries, including Russia, that are premised on using those shorter range, intermediate range and low yield weapons to engage in what's become known as escalate to de-escalate. Use a smaller nuclear weapon with the expectation that the United States won't respond because we don't have a similar weapon. If we needed to respond, it would be with a much larger, much more destructive weapon. So there were a lot of misconceptions about our nuclear posture review, but one thing I want to emphasize, and it's relevant to the discussion on DPRK, is our commitment to nonproliferation. If you think about all the work we've done on North Korea, this administration, prior administration, it's ultimately at heart based on a commitment to nonproliferation. Non-proliferation in North Korea itself, but also North Korea as a proliferator, horizontal proliferation out to other countries from North Korea. So our nuclear posture review is not raising the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. I'd point to the December 2014 Russian statement of military doctrine on their use of nuclear weapons, which is their most recent. It's very similar to ours. They talk about, as the ambassador said, conventional weapons that threaten the existence of Russia. Our nuclear posture review, Madam President has raised this issue, contemplates the use of non-nuclear strategic weapons against the United States that could be equally as devastating. And that's what our nuclear posture review is seeking to get at when we say, in extreme circumstances, we may use nuclear weapons in response. And we say that as a deterrence, because at base, our nuclear posture review is about deterrence. That's why we draft a 75-page public, transparent statement of our policy and doctrine. That's our nuclear policy review. We say it publicly so that there's no misunderstanding. This is about deterrence. There is no misunderstanding about the circumstances in which we maintain the right to use these awful weapons, and that is so that anyone who would think of challenging us knows the circumstances in which we would use them and would be deterred. So that's my response on the nuclear posture review. With respect to the JCPOA, a similar response on nonproliferation. I like to quote Secretary Mattis, who pithily describes the JCPOA as a flawed arms control agreement. We're looking to correct the flaws, to address the issues such as ballistic missiles that aren't addressed in the JCPOA in a separate agreement. Keep the JCPOA, address these other issues, these flaws in the agreement, issues that aren't covered in the agreement, address them, and we are engaged in discussions with our European colleagues now. Address those and keep what's good about the JCPOA and address the flaws.
Thank you. One follow-up question, then we're going to go to the audience for questions. On North Korea, I'm just reading the press as a private citizen, but it looks like from the statements that Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis has made that the U.S. does want to have, if it's possible, some kind of conversations, talks with the North Korean regime along with our ally, the Republic of Korea, to see if there is a possibility of constructing eventually some kind of negotiation. Is that essentially what the Trump administration is trying to do?
That's what the Vice President has said and what Secretary Tillerson has said. We are open to talks. What we're not open to is negotiations and making concessions to the North Koreans without any effort by them to make steps to commit to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists for their remarks. We do have a lot of time for questions. Not every one of the panelists has to answer every question, but please feel free. If you want to answer, if any of you want to answer, just signal me and we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
Is it ready?
Oh, it's Javier. Javier, I couldn't see you with the glare of the lights. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nick. I have to tell you the truth. I come out of this debate very, very troubled. I think the manner in which we are talking about nuclear weapons in 2018 is very different than the way we talked about nuclear weapons a couple of years ago. Now, I understand that we are living in a complicated world. I understand that the world globally is very synchronized in the economic. Every country or every region of the world is growing in synchronized manner. So the economic part of our life collectively is going fairly well after the crisis. But what is not going well at all is the big powers relation, so the cooperative type of work in the international community as foreign policy and security is concerned. And this is a good example. To be talking today, in 2019, about, with this, in this light manner, about nuclear weapons, it is very troublesome. We are talking about a smaller nuclear weapons. Low yield, we hid or hide between the low yield, a small nuclear weapon that can be used in a tactical scheme. I mean, this is really quite an important change. And this cannot be taken as a natural thing in a debate here, like with the lightness that has been treated. I don't think that the change on the policy of the United States, I have read it carefully, I'm not an expert, but I see, if I compare with the previous one position on nuclear weapons, the possibility of using nuclear weapons in a conventional response it has been wider. It is wider. And I think that this is something that really in this conference it should be taken much more seriously. I think we are in a very complicated situation, my dear friends, if we continue talking about everything with the possibility of putting nuclear weapons, not on the way of disarmament, that was the way in which we should be talking about, but in the way of armament. Armament because we use it further, or we can lower the level of threshold to use them, or in the size and yield of the nuclear weapons that we have. So I'm very worried with this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that's a question that certainly, I know that the President would like to respond to, and I think that Deputy Secretary Sullivan is probably going to respond to as well. Madam President.
Yes, thank you, dear Xavier, for that question, but I would like to answer you by doing something really unusual. I would first like to agree with our Russian colleague here, fully and totally. Escalate to de-escalate is nothing new. It's been there for a long time, and also it's been there in this sense that wherever there is a bigger exercise going on, then this normally ends with simulation of the nuclear escalation to de-escalate. So the fact that we are now noticing it and taking it up on our side, it cannot put the risk profile up. It's important that to talk about it, and I very much appreciate that we do talk about it. Not talking about this is not making us safer, not at all. So indeed, let's go ahead and talk about it.
Thank you. Deputy Secretary.
We aren't being cavalier in addressing these issues. We're trying to be transparent, and transparency contributes and supports deterrence. The low-yield weapons that you referred to, God forbid anyone should use them. We want to have a credible deterrent so that those will never be used. That's the point, not that we would use them. Our doctrine is not to escalate, to de-escalate. We want, through this nuclear posture review, through the development of these programs, which are not new, to deter that behavior. We're not going to introduce any new weapons. We're going to maintain the New START treaty limits. We are going to update, as China and Russia are, modernize our triad. The alternative is we have systems which are decades old, which are long past their shelf life. If we don't have a credible deterrent, that's a bigger threat to nuclear war than modernizing our system, maintaining the current treaty limits, being firm on non-proliferation and on arms control, New START, INF, and more.
Ambassador Kislyak.
Thank you. Well, I've heard many times people attributing to Russia the concept of escalate to de-escalate. It's not ours. I told you the two instances where nuclear weapons of Russia can be used. There is nothing else. And we read the current American strategy exactly as escalate to de-escalate. Exactly. And making the whole issue of use of nuclear weapons a kind of extension of a battlefield rather than deterrence. But one of the problems with the concept of reduced power of nuclear weapons is that it creates an illusion, that you can afford to use nuclear weapons trying to model the escalation scheme the way you think the escalation is going to happen. In our view, it's an illusion. Just try to imagine the ballistic missile from submarine with small warhead flying towards Russia. How we will react to this? It's nuclear submarine launching ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead. It's an illusion to model the useful application of that kind of weapons.
Javier, your question has gotten everyone's attention. Madame Ying is asked to speak as well.
I just want to say that Javier's expressed concern is widely shared in China too. And I also want to say that the US description of a threat from China is very puzzling for the Chinese. There are people in the US who lost lives, who who are threatened by terrorists, for example, and guns on the streets, for example. But for China, there's no reason whatsoever for China to threaten the United States of America as a country. Our two countries, remember, the bulk of our foreign reserves are in your country. So why should we think about threatening the US? So please do not use China or any other country as an excuse of changing your nuclear posture review. Do please face the reality in the world. And I think China, US, Russia, we all need to sit down and talk before we all of a sudden issuing some kind of assessment of a threat of the other side. Thank you.
Our nuclear posture review is based on a factual assessment of the changed security circumstances. It's laid out in detail, in writing, transparently by the United States. I'd encourage my colleagues from China and Russia to do the same. We make these statements public. We're transparent. We want to deter nuclear war. We don't want to engage in nuclear war. That's the whole point of a nuclear posture review, writing a 75-page document and explaining it and subjecting yourselves to cross-examination like this because we're transparent. We don't, for example, deny the existence of a ground-launched cruise missile that violates the INF Treaty. We don't deny the existence of weapon systems, as Russia did for years, deny the existence of the so-called 9M279, their designation, intermediate-range nuclear weapon that violates the INF Treaty. In December, they admitted its existence. We encourage transparency. We want to engage in dialogue, whether it's under the New START Treaty or under INF, the SVC. We would like to engage in dialogue with Russia on the INF Treaty. We'd welcome that because we welcome transparency, openness. Ultimately, it contributes to deterrence and not proliferation.
Thank you. I imagine we're going to come back to this subject. Let's take two questions. We have a question from one of our Uniconference young leaders, and then following your question, I'd like to ask our great friend Karl Kaiser to ask his. We'll take those two. We've got time to fit some more in after that. Please.
Hello, I'm Min Pak. I'm an international politics scholar and international law scholar. Yesterday, at many speeches and in few speeches today, the point echoed was that democracy will win eventually. I thought that was the point that was keep coming out. It may take some time, but justice will be achieved eventually, and the current situation in Crimea will be fixed for Ukraine. I thought that message was keep coming out as well. So here comes my question. That although it may take time, shouldn't we involve more voices as we approach the denuclearization of North Korea in the right way? So my suggestion or my personal opinion, I'm wondering, shouldn't a six-party talk be discussed first if many people, especially South Koreans, who are most close to the danger in distance, support the idea? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll get to your question. We also have Karl Kaiser's question. Mike is coming just behind you, Karl.
It's a question to John Sullivan. Apologize. We don't want to put you on the spot. Back to the Iran deal, the JCPOA. You made a very important point on which there's no disagreement. The Europeans are extremely worried that this deal may blow up. You know that. It has been said by many. It has also been said by Ambassador Kislyak. If the president decertifies, it's the end of the deal. The Europeans are profoundly worried. That is the problem. There's no problem with discussing the other questions that Iran raises. Why decertify the deal which he has announced and not address the other questions and continue with the deal?
Well, that's
let's do this.
I'm sorry.
Really take the first question first, second question second. Madam Chair, I think you're the best person to begin. I don't know if others want to come in on this question. Do we need more voices? And should the six-party countries be involved? Please.
The Korean government has a very specific strategy. Korea needs to have a self-defense measures, and we also need to have combined defense posture as well. And we are going to strengthen coordination with the international community and applying the maximum pressure and sanctions. And this is the principle that we have been upholding. North Korea sent a delegation of athletes and a high-level delegation as well. And I believe the sanctions and pressure made a contribution to this development. But like I said before, sanctions and pressure are just a means to getting North Korea to come to the negotiation table. And I think this also includes the resumption of the six-party talks. Within the framework of the six-party talks, we can have a Pyongyang-Washington dialogue and Pyongyang-Japan dialogue as well. And trilateral dialogue involving North Korea, China, and the U.S. And we are really open to all forms of dialogue. And under the current situation, the current circumstances, the Korean government has the only channel with the North. After the Pyeongchang Olympics, we are going to explore more ways of dialogue. And after the Olympics, we are going to have more contacts with the North, including in the culture field, and we're going to have military talks as well. And the two Koreas have agreed on that, and I'm pretty optimistic on this development. And I think the interest and attention of the international community is really important in leading the situation to a positive manner.
I think you have your opportunity to respond to Carl's question on
Sure.
the JCPOA.
What the United States has proposed in discussions with our European allies is that before the next deadline for certification, May 12th, that we make some progress to addressing these issues, that there's a commitment, which I believe we will have from the Europeans, to address the issues, ballistic missiles, the litany. Maintain what has been achieved in the JCPOA, maintain what, as I said, Secretary Mattis has called that flawed arms control agreement, address the flaws. What we need before May 12th is work toward that, and a commitment that we can credibly show to the President we're making progress to address these issues.
I'm going to call in former Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, who's here. He was one of the negotiators for the United States, along with Secretary Kerry, of the JCPOA, and the mic should be heading towards you. It should be heading towards you momentarily. He's right in the middle here. Thank you. We'll just hand it down.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the JCPOA, I think it's very important to understand what it is and what it is not. And certainly, historically, certainly in 2015, the critiques were all of what the agreement was not. Now, as the Deputy Secretary has said, it's completely legitimate to address all the other regional issues that we have with Iran, but not, of course, but within the framework of staying with the JCPOA, which accomplishes what its goal was. But there's also a lot of discussion about so-called flaws, which are seldom named, and there's also often either an explicit or implicit suggestion that after, let's say 15 years, when the major nuclear activity restrictions expire, the most important of which, by the way, is the limitation to 300 kilograms of very low enriched uranium, that somehow we're back to where we were, and Iran is now, and I'll quote a very distinguished statesman from a hearing 2 weeks ago, is now virtually guaranteed to be a nuclear power. This makes no sense whatsoever, because at 15 years, let's say, not only do we have additional constraints like uranium supply chain, but most importantly, we have agreements, unique agreements on verification, completely unique to this agreement, that never go away. That is the foundation of the agreement. Verification. Commitment to the additional protocol with a 24-day maximum for access is unique, it is forever, it is the heart of the agreement. I might add as well, the Iraq reactor, the plutonium factory so-called, a permanent commitment to shipping the fuel out. No weaponization activities, no other NPT signatory is committed to that. Iran is committed to that forever. So we should at least discuss what the agreement is and not make vague statements about correcting things that are not there to be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm sure we'll come back to it. Let's take two questions. Stephen Heinz, President of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Ivo Dalder, President of the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations.
Thank you, Nick. Just to extend this conversation about the JCPOA in Iran, I'd like to ask Deputy Secretary Sullivan, given the administration's concerns, and I think many of us share the concerns of the administration with Iran's other behavior, is the U.S. prepared to go into dialogue with Iran about that behavior?
Thank you. Ivo, Ambassador Ivo Dalder, former ambassador to NATO.
A question to Deputy Secretary, but also to Ambassador Kislyak. With regard to the negative security assurances that you mentioned, I just want to get a clarification from you and then ask the Ambassador to see if they would like to copy the American negative security assurance. In the NPR, the negative security assurance of 2010, which says that the United States will not threaten or use nuclear weapons against any party to the NPT in good standing, period, is repeated. That was a major statement. It basically means we will not threaten or use nuclear weapons against about all but 10 countries. There's a second statement in which you also refer to, which is the possibility of a strategic impact of a non-nuclear attack possibly leading to a nuclear response. Can we take it that if you add these two statements, that non-nuclear attack could only come from a either a non-NPT country or a nuclear weapon state, but it does not apply to, say, a NPT country in good standing that may use that kind of non-nuclear attack? And to Ambassador Kislyak, is Russia prepared to endorse the same negative security assurance as the United States has in 2010 and now again in 2018?
So let's take the questions in order, Deputy Secretary. The first one from Stephen Heinz was, if you have problems with Iran, why not have a dialogue with Iran the way that the Obama administration did?
Right. Our first step now is having a discussion with our European allies. Our European allies, in turn, are having discussions with the Iranians. This is at a very early stage. I would hope and expect that as these discussions continue, of course the United States would be included, just as happened when the JCPOA was negotiated, but this will take time, and there will need to be significant progress before we do that. But until then, we're dealing with our E3 allies and the EU.
Thank you. And the second question for both the Deputy Secretary and Ambassador Kislyak, the negative security assurances that Ambassador Ivo Dalder raised, your respective positions on that question.
The U.S. commitment to the negative security assurances is ironclad. It is as it says.
Ambassador Kislyak.
We are not planning to change our CDM.
Okay. Very good. Yes, sir.
Matthias Nasty side. My question is about North Korea, and it goes to John Sullivan. We have an almost universal agreement about the strategy of maximum pressure. We have had, as it was said, 10 resolutions by the United Nations.
Could you please speak up?
Now, your government goes beyond. It says you don't exclude a military option. You said all options are on the table, including a military option. Can you describe to us under which circumstances your government would be willing to turn to military power in solving the North Korea problem?
the United States approach to the North Korean problem is a diplomatic approach, maximum pressure, and we think, as the Vice President said, talks, and we hope talks leading to negotiations. We need to be prepared to respond in the event of an attack by North Korea or other hostile acts, given the statements and behavior of the North Korean regime, firing missiles over Japan, threatening to fire missiles over or at Guam. We need to be prepared to respond to that. We need to be nimble, we need to be prepared, but our approach to the North Korean problem is a diplomatic one, maximum pressure, and as the Vice President said, now maximum pressure with talks when the North Koreans are ready.
And just because, that's a fair question, obviously, but that gets to deterrence. What's been in the news recently over the last several months is this proposed idea that some in the administration favor a preventive attack by the United States, or the bloody nose strategy. Is that the policy of the United States, or is a diplomatic track where you're heading?
The policy is, as I've said, maximum pressure on the DPRK, working with our partners, such as China, with Russia, with the other members of the UN Security Council, enforcing the UN Security Council resolutions. Maximum pressure, and as the Vice President said, talk if the North Koreans are willing to talk.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, please. Microphone just in the middle on your left.
Woo Myung-yeon from the Aspen Institute for Policy Studies in Seoul, Korea. My question is to Secretary Sullivan, but I don't want to continue to put the spot on you, so...
Everyone's putting him on the spot, so it's okay.
So I'd like to ask the same question to...
I no longer practice law. When I practiced law, I charged by the hour. So I didn't mind being up here talking. So now that I'm a public servant, I'm less enthusiastic about it. But go ahead.
So I wanted to say that I want to ask the same question to my representative, Madam Choo. So my question is this. General McMaster, in his earlier speech, said that I called out the international community to continue to isolate North Korea diplomatically and economically, such as cutting off all diplomatic ties and also expand the sanctions on North Korea. That's one. But we know that Kim Jong-un just invited President Moon Jae-in to Pyongyang to have a summit. And that's not going to happen in isolation, meaning that after the Olympics, the chances North Korea and South Korea are going to engage in different types of exchanges, including economic and humanitarian. Do you believe that doesn't really distract from the campaign to isolate North Korea continuously? That's my question.
So as the Vice President said on his return from the Olympics, he's been engaged closely on behalf of the administration with President Moon to coordinate, as we always do with our South Korean allies, to make sure there's no daylight between our approach. What I'd say is for the maximum pressure campaign and isolating North Korea, all of us in this room, all of us who are committed to nonproliferation, every one of us should be committed to isolating North Korea. North Korea should not be allowed to get away with what it's doing, flouting UN Security Council resolutions, exacerbating nuclear weapons proliferation. Anyone who's in favor of nuclear nonproliferation should be in favor of isolating North Korea.
Madam Choo, did you have, or Madam Fu, did you have a comment on this question? Would you like to comment?
First of all, so how we are going to move after the Pyeongchang Olympics? The U.S. has a lot of issues to deal with, including Iranian nuclear agreement. But nuclear threat is a really urgent threat. And North Korea's nuclear capabilities are really advanced. And by 2020, North Korea will have 100 nuclear warheads. And North Korea will be able to possess one nuclear warhead and produce HEU in a great amount. So we need to put a freeze on the North Korea's nuclear program. And to place a freeze, we have to take advantage of this momentum provided by the Pyeongchang Olympics. And top priority in the U.S.'s arms control should be on North Korea's nuclear issue. This is a point that I want to reiterate.
I want to challenge the question itself, because isolating North Korea is not the purpose. It is aimed at bringing about a solution. As Secretary Sullivan said, the U.S. approach is also diplomatic. And diplomatic approach means engagement. So you have to engage the party in order to achieve the solution. I don't see there's any conflicting purpose in it.
Thank you very much. I wanted to give the last word for this portion of the program to the President Kaljulaid, because I thought she started off with some very challenging comments, and I thought you deserved the last word.
Well, I find myself here in the shoes of my predecessor, Thomas Hendrik Ilves, who always tells me that we keep talking about these technology issues, but the others just don't play the same ball. So I'm really, really worried, because I think we should be also playing that future-oriented ball. But don't despair. I think the world leaders can vote Estonia into the United Nations Security Council for the period 2021, and we will try to have an impact there precisely on this issue.
So the campaign has started.
Something really touched me in the words of the young leader. She said democracy will win finally in the end. I totally agree with that statement, but it wouldn't happen all by itself. Democracy will indeed win if we, and here I want to agree with all my co-panelists here, if we do keep talking. But we need to keep talking from the firm point of our position of our value base, and also from the strong deterrence position. And this applies on both sides of the globe, I would say. I would also like to commend what South Korea is currently trying to achieve, trying to talk with North Korea. And you know why? You said something which astonished me that you would say it, Nick. You said maybe they're doing it to compromise the relations between South Korea and the United States. I mean, come on, have some faith in our common value base. I have faith in our common value base. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much. So we're going to take 15 minutes to meet and hear from the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Beatrice Fihn. In order to do that, she needs to come up here, and the great members of this panel must now retire. Thank you all for enlightening us today. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thanks. We'll see you. Thank you. Thanks. Well done. Well done. Yes. Thanks, Madam President. I'll come and see you in Tallinn.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you. Okay, Beatrice. I've got to.
Over here?
Yes. Pardon? Is it okay? I took my lessons from. Okay. Okay, we're going to bring the meeting back to order. Mr. Deputy Secretary, Mr. Ambassador. Please have a seat. Please have a seat if we could. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to recommence the program. We're going to start the program again, please. Can I ask all of you to join me in congratulating the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Beatrice Fihn. Beatrice, I know you've got some remarks. We want to hear from you, and then we're going to open it up for questions for you from the audience. Please.
Well, hi, everyone. I've been asked to provide some comments to this panel. It's very exciting and enthusiastic panel that makes us feel really cheerful. Number one conclusion is that perhaps we need a drink quickly after this. But second, drinks first and second things. What strikes me really listening to this panel is how the conversation always centers around very sterile and abstract concepts, deterrence, stability, and...
Could we have some order in the House, please, just to pay respect to a Nobel laureate?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it never really involves actually talking about how the nuclear armed states and their allies are prepared to indiscriminately kill hundreds of thousands of civilians with weapons of mass destruction. That is what we're talking about, really. And perhaps this is because they think it won't ever happen, that these weapons will remain in silos, on planes, in the seas, quietly forever. Maybe they think that it's guaranteed that deterrence will never fail, that there will never be an irrational decision made, never an irrational leader, never an accident, misunderstanding, no mistakes ever. But the people that are charged with keeping us safe is actually living in a fantasy, kind of a world where nuclear weapons can exist forever, can be made more usable, yet magically never be used. Or even the greatest fantasy, used without grave consequences for civilians, without violating the laws of war. Because we do know what happens when nuclear weapons are used. We know the mass slaughtering of civilians that would occur, how the blast could level an entire city, how the fires will burn the remains of the buildings and the people there, how the radiation will poison survivors for decades. And the governments of the nuclear armed states and many of their allies, they don't really like to talk about the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. They don't really want to engage in conversations about what happens when we actually use nuclear weapons. They seem to simply hope that it won't happen. But relying on luck is not an appropriate security strategy. And there is always a risk that nuclear weapons will be used. And this is true as long as they exist. And the risk is certainly right now at its greatest since the end of the Cold War, and possibly ever. And we know if we keep nuclear weapons forever, they will be used. We know that. And the language of certain leaders is actively winding the doomsday clock towards midnight. And so-called more responsible nuclear armed states are not actually that much better. While their words might be tempered, their policies and actions are actually just as bad as someone shouting, "My button is bigger than yours." And we've just seen the launch of Trump's new nuclear doctrine. It calls for more usable nuclear weapons, lowers the threshold for when they can consider using nuclear weapons. And it's actually an all-out attempt to take nuclear weapons out of the silos and onto the battlefields. And together with the modernization programs and the refusal to take disarmament commitments seriously by the other nuclear armed states, we are moving towards nuclear use. And the countries that allow nuclear weapons on their territory or participating in and contribute to plans and preparations to use nuclear weapons, they are not blameless either. And no country can claim to be liberal, democratic, or reasonable if they support this march towards a new nuclear arms race and do not actively stand up and try to prevent the use of nuclear weapons. And the current nuclear weapons policies of the nuclear armed states is really a gamble with all of humanity. And each day, these policies are moving us closer to the use of nuclear weapons. They undermine the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it encourages proliferation. And this is a gamble that we all will lose. There are no winners. And the only nuclear policy that increases security is the only rational and responsible one, the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. And luckily, we have the pathway forward to that, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Because history shows us that the prohibition of a type of weapon facilitates progress towards elimination, not the other way around. And weapons that have been outlawed are seen increasingly as illegitimate and losing their political status. No nation today boasts about being a chemical weapon state. No nation argues that it's acceptable in extreme circumstances to use the sarin nerve agent. No nation proclaims the right to unleash on its enemy plague or polio. And that is because international norms have been set and the perceptions of the weapon has been changed. And each state that joins this treaty will make a contribution to that norm and will help change the perceptions of this weapon. And of course, I can recognize the value of stable military alliances, such as the mutual security commitments under NATO. But NATO has an obligation and a stated goal to work towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And we're therefore very pleased to see countries like Norway and Italy investigating how to join the treaty eventually at the parliamentary level. And we will really encourage all NATO states to start working for an alliance that will enhance security, not one that threatens to slaughter civilians, undermines agreed treaties like the NPT, and encourages proliferation. So we need states right now to show their unwavering commitment to disarmament and to have a clear goal that the prohibition is the core of building a framework for a stable security framework for the 21st century. And just as a sort of final reflection of my 2 days here in Munich, too often the security and defense sector seems to kind of forget who they are promising to secure: human beings. And the citizens, represented by elected leaders, and civil society, they need to be at the heart of these discussions on security policy. And that is especially true for marginalized and vulnerable groups who often carry the burden of suffering the consequences of dangerous decisions by mostly men with dangerous big bombs. And if we allow constantly only the same voices to speak, we will only hear the same ideas, and we will not move forward. So I'm really appreciating the Munich Security Forum for inviting me here, for allowing civil society to speak here, because I think that today, more than ever, civil society has an extremely important role to protect and strengthen democracy that we see is under attack. And because people actually want a security policy that is grounded in the protection of civilians, in respect of humanitarian law, in respect of democracy. And for us, only the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons will achieve that and start this long and very urgently needed process to pull us back from the brink. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Beatrice Fihn is the Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, Nobel Peace Prize Laureate 2017. We have time for questions. I just want to take the first, if you don't mind. I'm looking at a number of us who are a little bit older. When I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, as young kids, we were terrified by the prospect of a nuclear war. We went through the Cuban Missile Crisis in our country. The Russian people did as well. The Soviet people, the people of Cuba did. Think of Neville Shute's novel On the Beach, 1962, I think. Think of Stanley Kubrick's great film, Dr. Strangelove. It was all about this terrible societal angst. And that seems to have disappeared a little bit. And is your campaign, are you trying to just energize people and bring us back to the fact that these are weapons of terror? Because I think for the last few decades, it's been such a relatively more placid time with the end of the Cold War. Is that what motivated you here?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of forgot about nuclear weapons there for a while. And we see now, of course, resurgence of this issue. And I think that perhaps people in my generation who grew up after the Cold War haven't really thought that it was a threat we needed to deal with. It was kind of silent for a while. But I think that's changing very fast. And I'm sure that there are children in Hawaii who are traumatized by thinking that they have 20 minutes left to live. I mean, we saw stories about parents trying to push their kids down the sewers to protect them, hiding them in bathtubs because that's what something they heard that would help, or what do you do these 20 minutes? So I think that was a bit of a wake-up alarm, I think, for many people. The fact that false alarm came through, false alarms happen, and people thought it was real, and they thought it was real because of the current situation right now. Most people didn't hesitate. They thought that it was actually an incoming missile. And to think that in 2018, we still live like that is unacceptable. And it doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to have these weapons. I think that we have built a campaign. I think that is actually led and driven by people who grew up after the Cold War and who are coming into power positions now and are taking, sort of growing up and did not have that and don't understand why we would have these weapons that make quite little sense when we think about it rationally.
I was very impressed by Madame Chouei's remarks today, and it reminded me of my colleague Graham Allison, who I think is here, and he describes what's happening on the Korean Peninsula, and you're worried about this, as a Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. So the same psychological fear is there. Questions for Beatrice Fihn from this group? And since I'm a college professor, I'm going to just call on Ahmet Azumcu, who is also, his organization, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the Organization for the Control of Chemical Weapons in Den Haag. And Ahmed, we're going to get the microphone here to the front row. I don't know if you want to respond to what Beatrice Fihn has said, but the two of you are in the same business, in a way.
First of all, I should congratulate the Nobel laureate. I carefully listened to her remarks. She referred to the risks associated with the continued existence of chemical weapons. She said they will be used. So it's quite a definitive, in fact, terrifying observation. But there are other views. There are other views that the nuclear weapons, in fact, prevented, in fact, conventional wars as well in the past, during the Cold War and later on. Therefore, they contributed to the continued peace and stability and security of people. So there are these two conflicting views in the case of nuclear weapons, which didn't exist in the case of chemical weapons that we had to deal. So we knew that, for instance, in Syria, if the chemical weapons continue to exist, they could be used more frequently than it happened. So there might be some differences of opinion on those two different categories of WMDs. So I would like to ask, in fact, whether she would also, agree that to a certain extent the nuclear weapons may have contributed to peace and stability in the past.
Yeah, and congratulations to you too. It was a lot of fun winning a Nobel Peace Prize, wasn't it? Yes, it was good fun. We can debate deterrence forever, over and over. You can show arguments in favor, arguments against. The fact is that whether or not it deterred during the Cold War, for example, it also brought us to the brink many times, both through incidents like the Cuban Missile Crisis, but also accidents. There were numerous occasions where something has gone on. There's been a lot of research this last couple of years about mishaps, mistakes, accidents, dropping a bomb in somewhere from a plane. So I think that whether or not deterrence worked one time or not, perhaps isn't the question we should be asking. Will it always work? If deterrence is so great, then why aren't we welcoming North Korea to have nuclear weapons? Why isn't it creating peace in the region? Why don't we feel safe then, if they are so stable and create peace? Why shouldn't all countries have them? We have, as an international community, accepted that somehow these bring peace, but they also don't bring peace because they're also really dangerous. And we're trying to do both things at the same time. And at some point, we're going to have to make up our minds. Are these weapons good or bad? And I think that the consequences are so grave that it's enough with one mistake to cause catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And I think that is, we cannot guarantee that this will last forever, that we will be lucky every time for the right. Statistically, we know it will happen. And I think that is where the focus has to be.
We have time for one more question of Beatrice Fihn. Mr. Minister, please. I think a mic is coming right behind you. In 2 seconds.
Es wäre sehr schön, die Atomwaffen zu verbieten. Ich stimme völlig, eine völlig unterschätzte.
I fully agree that this is an underestimated danger. But the question I'm asking myself, these weapons exist and they are significant numbers, both in the United States and in the Soviet Union, China, and other countries. So these weapons exist. So you would be outlawing them, but they would still exist. So how do you like to force someone to do away with their stocks of nuclear arms? That is my question. So the question is not outlawing them or not. That would be a nice thing. But what do we do about the huge stocks that already exist all over the world, and that would be sufficient to destroy the whole world several times? So how do you get superpowers to give up their weapons? This is what I'd like to know. What is your idea? How are you going to do this?
Just wanted to welcome General Scaparrotti, the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, who's here. Thank you for being here. And Vartan, I think you had a question to add to this, and then a comment to add, and then Beatrice will give you the final word. The mic right here for, yes, for Vartan Gregorian.
Since we're in Germany, I like to quote from Berchtold, the playwright, who wrote in Galileo, "Cursed be the land that needs heroes," because he thought heroes should be ordinary, not extraordinary. So thank you for being a hero, along with all the Dans and Lugars and every Ahmed who's here, all of you who witness as individuals for the cause of peace and memory of humanity. Thank you.
Final word.
I think that is exactly the issue. How do we get states to want to disarm? That is the big challenge. We can't, and I think that's the big challenge of arms control, this kind of idea that we're somehow going to reduce a weapon that we also attach so much value and prestige to. These are so necessary for our security, but we're going to reduce them. Why? Why do you want to, like, again, are they good or not? Why, we need to make up our minds. So I think that the nuclear armed states are never going to disarm unless it's in their interest. So this treaty is about making it in their interest. It is about to stigmatize nuclear weapons, make them more politically costly. I think we've seen, for example, American president for 8 years who was very progressive, had the most progressive sort of ideas about nuclear disarmament as we've seen from a president.
President Obama.
Yes.
Yeah, the Prague speech.
The Prague speech set out this kind of vision. But it did not cost him anything to not go ahead with it. These are very difficult things. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be a lot of opposition to moving forward with the disarmament. There has to be also a negative impact of doing nothing. And right now, it's too easy for politicians to do nothing. So we have to create incentives for politicians to feel like the current status quo is not sustainable. So the treaty is really about shifting perceptions about this weapon, make it a burden politically, make it difficult, attack the financing through the companies that produce them, build this international consensus that these weapons are unacceptable. We don't do that anymore. We have behaved in many awful ways through history as humanity, and then we decided we don't do that anymore because of norms, because of changes of behavior. So this is a starting point to change that. If we want them to disarm, we're going to have to tell someone that it's unacceptable to have these weapons, it's unacceptable to use them, it's unacceptable to possess them in order for them to get there.
Well, I want to thank you for two things. Thank you for the great work you've done already and will do, and thank you for challenging this audience today. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Well done.